When Elden Ring released, we would see a rich world of vast size and color, always expanding in size and in depth of what we thought we had known. First, an in-depth overworld, which would accompany impressive in size legacy dungeons, and then to only find still an underside of it all, retaining much mystery. But today we're going to talk about a much more obscure topic that looms beneath the surface of the story itself. One such topic is none other than a character who has seen more mention than Messmer in the base game, but would be without any further defining clarifications in neither dialogue nor item descriptions. This character has a very apparent once faction that since their time has been completely diminished from the significance of the storytelling, and yet their place with what we know would pin them as someone more crucial to the lore and the shaping of the world. I speak of course of the Gloam Queen, one of the most beloved lore figures of the Elden Ring community. There's many different takes and opinions regarding this character all across the more lore-fascinated fandom of Elden Ring, and the vast majority of them amount to most mainly theories and headcanon, but I will do my best to distinguish by what's definite and what's more of my interpretation as reasonable speculation. That said, there is but only a few true definite facts to go off of in the vastness of Elden Ring, but any smaller detail is always a curious one to play around with, and so without any further ado, let us... No, Rykard, no, stop. It's not your time yet. We're not told of their timeline, we're not told where they're from, we're not told of how this character looked like at all. But we've got a few clues to truly work with and make a good estimate of. From the Godskins, we know that she is in fact their mother. Obviously she would look somehow like them, but she would swaddle them in cloth at birth, of the very choice material that they would become known for by name, Godskins. We see a particular batch of Godskins, the nobles, and that they are described as more ancient than their apostle counterparts. What's an apostle in this case? Well, this would imply they are a sort of missionary, more than likely in representation of the Gloam Queen. In which case, it is likely the sightings of Black Flame monks was their doing. The nobles are both much older and more skilled in swordsmanship, and their noble's presence tells us that they had successfully hunted gods in the past. This will be a topic for later. The Black Flame of the Apostle derives from the sword once wielded by the Gloam Queen, and that once spared the very power of destined death within it. But the Gloam Queen would be defeated by America. Sorry. But the very queen mentioned would be defeated by Malekith, and destined death would be seized, stripped of the color from what is now Black Flame. It's implied a lot of these things were in possession of the Golden Order, where in his fleeing of Landale capital, Godric the Golden, also known as the Grafted, would take with him a multitude of treasures, and a definite part of that list was that of the prayer book of the Godskins as well as a seal. Malekith would, however, after his victory, seal destined death and keep it to himself. Thus did the demigods fear him. Lastly, we know that the Gloam Queen was an Empyrean, which to Elden Ring means she was selected by the Fingers for someone able to ascend to godhood. And statistically, those of Candace have also been all female. including Miquella's alter ego, Saint Trina. This is as far as the more factual contexts go, for the most part. There is going to be a few other things, but still, I will not
put these foolish ambitions to rest.
As for a timeline of her significance, I have two working theories of the Gloamite Queen's place in history. The first would precede the Erdtree. Originally, it was the Crucible Tree until the Golden Order took form within it with the Elden Beast's presence, with Marika's seizing of order. But with the speculation gathered from the DLC, there is much room to consider that Marika took it after the defeat of the Gloamite Queen, particularly with what is shown in the DLC story trailer, and it would clarify the nature of the countless bodies that now rest upon an Erim at the Divine Gate. Whichever the case, this is when Marika became a god, but whom she could have taken what appeared to be some sort of golden strand of order from, other than the Gloamite Queen in context of the depiction, would otherwise be a great mystery with what we know of lack of otherwise mentioned troubles to the Hornsent beyond Messmer's crusade as a betrayal, quote-unquote. To me, this would suggest a third-party factor to Marika's moment of ascension that was portrayed, as she was already an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers, and this would also suggest as far back in timeline further relevance in topic. But on the topic of that, the two fingers which give guidance come from earliest form presence of the greater will itself, which is the meteor which was the first to show up, the mother of all fingers known as Meteor. Meteor's one eye and its coloration has likewise sparked much debate, but I have a reasonable explanation to that. It's often noted that Meteor is adorned as one elaborate creation of finger manifestation in and of itself, and so it's no surprise that it's a fingerprint where its own face is. One of the big conclusions of quite a few people is that the face of Meteor is the symbolism behind the iconography of the symbol of the Black Flame incantation. I don't believe this is a mere coincidence, as their mother would have listened to the Two Fingers herself as an Empyrean. It would also place some insistence to the topic of shadows of Empyreans having similarity in eye color more to Meteor, and that they will take a more purpley hue and no tones of gold in their eyes. We can see this especially with the beast eye from Garak, or Malekith as we truly know his identity. And we can also see this with Blythe. And should we choose the Frenzied Path in Elden Ring, we see a similar eye color to Blythe in one of Melina's eyes, specifically the one she had shut. Albeit, these eyes are all still different fundamentally from Meteor's slightly more pink tones. Back on topic, the timeline, the speculation though, is that Marika and Gloamite Queen might have just settled their conflictions to the death and to the story to why Malekith was feared, in which case it would have been a passed on story and would proceed before most of the demigods were born. In which case, I would also like to point out in this case scenario is important that I speculate that Messmer was actually born of the Gloamite Queen and his father would have been Radagon. America being technically chaste while also married already to Godfrey would also play in a sort of Virgin Mary scenario in the lore, which may come into play with some of the Messmer's themes around him and explain the importance of America's belts to no longer being depicted in statues. I do think it is a symbolic thing of that nature, and like the armbands representing which marriage she was in. But to cap off the subject, the Godskins themselves are also described by their sets as having traits that to the Crucible, which, besides putting time on them, would suggest one possible reason of their skinning of gods could be to the topic of impurity to the Crucible, which ideas as we know of the fate of the shamans in the DLC being blended in flesh almost similarly to the idea of how the skins look so seamlessly come together in their cloth of the Godskins. Like, we aren't quite clarified what the gods were, as well as much further on the shamans themselves, so there is that kind of room of speculation. But the second opportunity of timeline would have to be after Marika had already seized Order, in which case she had already plucked death from Order upon its creation, according to Enya. It's quite possible that Gloam Queen existed in some way on the side of this and posed the threat, the ability and intent to slay Marika's demigods, and perhaps this rubbed Marika the wrong way with her history of mostly accursed children thus far. Marika was quite serious about her children, but also ashamed of their imperfect natures. I often speculate that by the time she had Godwyn the Golden, she was more unlikely to give him up for any reason, as he was her most prized and ideal of her children. I figure in this scenario, the role was for the Godskins to help facilitate the coming of death to the wishes of the Fingers, and same for their Gloamite Queen, but her right having the opportunity to rise to godhood adds more questions to this theory. It could also suggest that Marika's place could also be in ways challenged by the Gloamite Queen, or perhaps the two might simply be conflicting deities in the balance. One that mention, it could be noted, on that mention, it should be noted the eye color and abilities of the stone constructs that linger near Everjails. There's no proper lore to these animated structures, but they've been for a while associated to gravity as opposed to the Fingers. But with this understanding of the timeline, Messmer as the Gloamite Queen's child as a theory would have to be after Marika seized Order, and we're assuming all of her children were after her ascension. But regardless, in both understandings of the timeline, Radagon's presence goes back a surprising way with little explanation. But I suspect, like Mikula shedding himself of Saint Trina, that Marika shed herself of Radagon, believing him to be some sort of confliction with her ascendance. This also could play a role in the understanding of conducting the actions of Godfrey, perhaps. So where does the speculation of Messmer as being the Gloamite Queen's child come from, and where does it come into play? Well, Messmer acts quite often as an older and more experienced in the world of Elden Ring. So in general, we must take at least that much seriously, but we also know Marika is considered his mother, and often descendants of Radagon is also a descendancy to Marika to take into consideration. In which case, right now he is also accursed and strongly sworn to her wishes and needs, but he is quite loyal. I held back on suggesting sooner that iterations of his seals could use also possibly the designing choices behind like the fingerprint nature that gets used with the Godskin seals, but like upside down maybe, and of course like some of the flame iconography and what else. But that is a little bit of a speculation, but that mostly has to do with his flame and his snakes in nature for the most part, and it does make a lot of sense that it would include like a fingerprint nature to it, especially with his dedication to the Golden Order as an interest. And at the same time, the Godskins are also quite dedicated to the orders of the two fingers, the fingers in general, so the fingerprint makes perfect sense. But speaking of his serpents, both Messmer and the Godskins seem to be well related to the snake of the Volcano Manor in nature, and come especially the Serpent Men. In fact, the Serpent Men are suggested to have come from rituals held within the manor. The manor itself was actually where the Golden Order used to abduct nobles, with doubts who posed threat to the Golden Order, and it should come as no surprise that many dark natures would show up in the Elden Ring DLC with Messmer's lot with a similar-minded purpose. But wait, I thought it was Rykard's and Tanith's Volcano Manor. Rykard is confirmed to have usurped the manor. It was already existed, and he just kind of joined it and usurped it from the inside, as well as much of its resources that once belonged to the Erdtree's officials, who were all noble-born individuals, primarily run by House Mirai, who now reside to the Shaded Castle. This coincides even better when you realize Rykard and his siblings were born near or just before Messmer's crusade in the Land of Shadows. As Renala was still in fine mental state to bestow her blessing to her dear sister, Relana, who was insisting to join Messmer's crusade to the disregard of her Carian lineage, which would suggest that Radagon and Renala were married at that point, where peace between the two forces existed, and so in timeline, the manor just became its most open it's ever been to people from the outside, and the Carians, with their secret measures for their own distrust of their own people, would be the first in line to be considered for this kind of opportunity. But Messmer's ties to Radagon are otherwise definite. Some preferences of actions in both of their movements, such as the jump up in the air and throwing an exploding spear at you, dash attacks across the arena, and big explodey slam move. Messmer's theme also has a little bit of Radagon's theme in it, not to mention both of their red hair. Mind you that in Phase 1, Messmer's hair is for some reason a bit brighter in red, but in Phase 2 it's the correct shade of red to Radagon's. Besides his ties to similarity of serpents of the Godskins, he also favors a moveset of spins and jabs the same way as them. But the parts most people may point out of the most are both utilizing flames and having similarity in appearance toward each other when it comes to Messmer and the Godskins. But besides that, both Messmer and a Godskin noble having ties to the Volcano Manor is also probable cause for speculation in general. but it's quite possible that a Godskin tempted Rykard with a great serpent for power, and so they would bring the gods to their knees. There's also effective theories of the Gloamite Queen having a connection to snakes and an overall similar nature, but I can think of a few other lore YouTubers who might put that into a better perspective than I can for this video. In which case, I'm going to link those and kind of suggest them on the screen. But I've gotten way ahead of myself just a little bit. I believe in the modern setting that the Godskins now work for the Golden Order, mind you, and even more closely in ties with the Volcano Manor's operations, or at least what was the Volcano Manor's operations. I don't believe they follow the current Volcano Manor as much, as these were not like grace-ridden beings, but operating to the interest of the Golden Order, and in turn the Two Fingers, puts them into a place quite nicely. And so when the rising influx to the threat of a prophecy of the burning of the Erdtree came into realization, the recognized road toward it became a focus of most of its most menacing assets. The Godskins, in a sense, would operate as a hit squad on the hunt where the shadows of Empyreans can't reach out as effectively or efficiently. In this sense, all of their locations start coming to fruition, and the same with the fate of E.G., who knowingly turned his back on the Golden Order to serve Ranni. Ranni stole a fragment of death, and so a noble went on the search. With ties to Caria now, they had a certain room to be trusted, and so to protect the flame of the Godskins to its fundamental source, they hid the Godslayer Greatsword within a divine tower of the least likely to confront them. Radagon was, of course, about as loyal as it gets, and he looked up to both his father, Radagon, and to Godfrey as a lion, and was always striving to become like them. The apostles would lessen the influx of interested monks in the flame of fire giants towards black flame instead, and the road where the flame of ruins takes the player in Farum Azula would be the last stand to keep the Erdtree from reaching a greater state of ablaze. Now, I do want to clarify though, before I mentioned of an apostle turning a monk into a black flame monk, possibly for the Gloamite Queen, I do believe it might have been more of an Erdtree thing than the Gloamite Queens. Just something I want to clean up. But now some of you might be asking, so what's my theory of Melina in all of this? And I'm sorry to disappoint some of you, I don't believe she is the Gloamite Queen. Just straight up. And I'll give you my reasons why. I do believe she may have been slain as an early example of the Godskins as a hit squad in action, but that is also not very definite. There's another possibility or two to that, but when we first met Melina, we weren't sure of what to think about this mysterious girl peering before us, spectrally, burned and bodiless, and a tattoo marking of the talons of a bird over one eye closed. She herself was completely unsure of what had happened.
Me? I'm searching for my purpose, given to me by my mother inside the Erdtree, long ago, for the reason that I yet live, burned and bodiless. There is something for which I must apologize. I've acted the Fingermaiden, yet can offer no guidance. I am no maiden. My purpose was long ago lost.
But burned will be our first clue. The fact that she is bodiless would mean that she was either separate from her body in some way or shape or form, like maybe taken from it, or that it was just bodiless in the sense that it was completely gone, destroyed, killed off, whatever. But we're talking about the setting of Elden Ring, where death is hardly a thing anymore. So there's more to this in concept. And I'll understand if you gravitate towards the part where it's burned completely and our slew of life force in the world without death, that in the sense that it would have to be destined death that did it. But something I must stress, however, is that the game greatly foreshadows Melina as a character and her fate. Melina herself is rather young, if a bit naive in some ways, in that she doesn't understand much to the average relationships between mothers and their children. Being born of Marika, whom she refers to as mother, and she clarifies was born at the Erdtree. Further, a clarity that her mother was indeed Marika is the incantation that is described as an ancient one known otherwise by Marika is an incantation to sprout a minor Erdtree that blesses with heals within an area. As for the foreshadowing, it all starts upon entering Altus Plateau. We learned from perfumers that fire was banned from the capital to keep the Erdtree safe. We learned from a shield depicting the candle tree, which was considered forbidden, that there was the concern of burning the tree. But most importantly, at the flightless bird death painting, which is found in Dominula in the Altus Plateau North, which is a windmill village, by the way, we find the incantation called Fire's Deadly Sin, which, for those unfamiliar, sets the user ablaze. And this is where it should start sounding a little interesting, to the topic of Melina being burned, in the sense that she has burn marks on her body. This incantation also tells of the burning of the Erdtree as the first Cardinal Sin, something Melina is also quite familiar on. Once Morgott is dealt with, we realize in order to proceed, we must burn the thorns in our path. Much like in the DLC, we need Messmer's flame to grant access to the tower obscured in shadows by burning the sealing tree. But our kindling for this tree here in the main world has more to do with Messmer's younger sister, who had a vision of flame. It is also said that Messmer had with him also the original sin, but this in context falls short openly for many. Surely enough, the dagger Melina uses in the Morgott fight is the Blade of Calling, which is bestowed upon maidens who are set to burn themselves at the Forge of the Giants to light the Erdtree of Flame, or attempt to. But Melina tells us in time that this is her own decision making, but in truth, to the Golden Order who watched over the Forge of the Giants to make sure it wasn't ablaze, would come to worship it. Stranger yet, many prophets, faith-bound quite strongly in their investment to the Golden Order, they too would show signs of the cracks in the order to suddenly start using flame incantations. The monks themselves and their arts teach to fear the flame, to not be consumed by it. It's my theory that Melina was a sort of canary in the coal mine of the incidents, eventually setting herself on fires with the fire's deadly sin was self-injury to show for it as herself as burned, and this scenario to snuff out those flames may have been what led her to be bodiless. As for whether or not it was Black Flame that came and quieted the scenario, or her own flames, or the forges, I can't beat for certain, but when we reached the forge, she would manipulate the flames and ignite herself to burn the tree for us quite naturally. She had no gripes, she had no second thoughts, she just did it. No hesitation, no challenge, struggle. Should we have visited the Erdtree, we'd realized Melina's set tells us her intentions as a traveling maiden were along these lines to serve a purpose all along. And when we met her, she greets us, another traveler seeking their purpose just like her.
Greetings, traveler from beyond the fog. I am Melina. I offer you an accord.
Foul tarnished. In search of the Elden Ring. Emboldened by the flame of ambition. Someone must extinguish thy flame. Let it be Margit the Fell.
But for this topic, that is all the lore I have for you today. This time, as opposed to letting the lore flow more loosely, I wanted to try and coordinate something more scripted than usual, but running around and reading from a script is a little difficult, so I tried my best to do like the scripting first and then the video portion second. This is a bit of a big topic that I've wanted to go more in depth with for quite some time, and I know too few people touch Melina as a topic beyond either the Kindling Maiden or Gloam-eyed Queen theories. And I just really wanted to boil down at the facts a bit harder than just the common belief that there is no real further information on. But yeah, thank you very much for sticking around, hearing out this whole little thing I've got for you today. This is Blue Asterism Solstice, and you have yourselves a great day. And don't you put those foolish ambitions to rest. Take care.